Today we're starting our unit on World War II. The first thing that we're going to start with is the Great Depression. This was going to affect the entirety of the world, but we're going to focus on Germany for right now. We already know that Germany lost a lot of their land to surrounding nations as a condition of the Treaty of Versailles. Remember, the Treaty of Versailles, the main goal was to punish Germany for everything during World War I. They had to take responsibility as well as pay for it. That's where the war reparations come back. The Allies were going to collect money to pay back all the war debts to the U.S. because war was very expensive, and so the Allies had to borrow money, and a lot of times the Allies borrowed money from the U.S. So, Germany was given this huge amount of money they had to pay, $390 billion, which is what it would be today, for the war. So Germans became bankrupt because they all were taxed to try and pay back this war debt, and then they became embarrassed, guilt-ridden, and angry. Nobody was happy about this, especially in Germany, because they felt that they were being unfairly treated. Then came the stock market crash in the U.S., and this was going to be a huge problem for the entire world because it was going to trigger a global economic crisis in 1929, and this is what was going to become known as the Great Depression. So, because the stock market crashed in the U.S., this meant that Americans were going to stop lending money to Europe to help them rebuild after World War I. And without all of that U.S. money and loans and investments, the European economy started to decline. So they were also experiencing some economic troubles. And then the Depression made Germany's debt even worse because the value of money dropped. Because people were trying to print more and more of it, it became less and less valuable. So it was very difficult to actually buy anything in Germany because money was so useless. Some people even said it was better to burn it for fire because that's the only thing it was useful for. So, inflation. This occurs when money loses its value, and subsequently the price of goods increase, which makes it more difficult for people to purchase everything that they need. So, if you go to the store and you have to buy milk, and it's $2, but you try and go to the store to buy milk the next day, and it's $15, you might not have the $15 to buy the milk because money is so worthless, you have to use more of it to pay for something that used to be only a little bit of money. So on the graph, you can see all of these are all different lines of countries. So if you look over here at Germany, Germany is shooting straight up because of the unsustainable debt. They printed all this money, which led to a period of severe hyperinflation in Germany. And then at the height of the crisis in 1923, one US dollar was worth 4 trillion German marks. As you can see, it skyrocketed here. France also went up, Italy as well. Spain kind of stayed a little bit the same. The US went down a little bit, and the UK went down. So, when we talk about the Great Depression, you need to remember that it affected all of the world. It was a worldwide crisis, not just in the United States. So this brings us to some differences in the different types of economies. So a command economy is an economy in which production, investment, prices, and incomes are determined centrally by a government. So when you think about a command economy, think about it being controlled by the government. If you think about a market economy, it relies on market forces such as supply and demand. So this is when they let the market do whatever it needs to. There's very little government intervention. So it's all based around supply and demand. A mixed economy is kind of a halfway between command and market. They try and mostly let supply and demand change the economy, but if things get really bad, then the government will step in. The United States is actually an example of a mixed economy because we have government intervention, but we like to try and let supply and demand lead the economy. To background, it was one of the deadliest wars. There was up to 84.5 million deaths. There was only 30 million in World War I. So comparatively, World War II was very devastating. The 11 million died as a result of the Holocaust. 6 million of them were Jews, and 5 million of them were others that were targeted by the Nazis. There has been no other war in history that has been as widespread as this, and included many, many different countries. Almost everyone got involved, because it included countries, colonies, and territories around the entire world. And World War II is going to last from 1939 to 1945. So, this is only around 6 years of war, and it's up to 84.5 million deaths in 6 years. So this is going to be a very deadly war in a comparatively short amount of time. So the battles took place in 3 different major theaters. When we say theaters, we're talking about places in the world. So it's going to take place in Europe, Pacific Asia, and North Africa. Some of the most famous conflicts that you might have heard about would be D-Day, which is also known as the Battle of Normandy. So this is when the Canadian troops landed on the French shores of Normandy to invade German-occupied Western Europe. During World War II, France will be taken over by the German forces. So this is when troops from the Allied powers are moving back in to take over France. There's also the Battle of Britain, which was an air invasion made by the Germans in 1940. We're going to see a lot of planes being utilized during World War II. And then, as many of you have already heard about, Pearl Harbor, which was the out-of-nowhere attack on Hawaii, which actually brought the U.S. into World War II. And this was made by the Japanese on the U.S. Pearl Harbor. These are some of the major leaders that you're going to hear about during World War II. We have Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Hideki Tojo, Winston Churchill, Joseph Stalin, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Harry Truman. So Hitler was actually the Chancellor of Germany. He had an actually elected position. The people elected him into power. He didn't just take it. Mussolini was an Italian military leader, and he was going to partner with Germany. Then we have Japan. Hideki was the Prime Minister of Japan. Winston Churchill, he was the Prime Minister of the UK, the United Kingdom. And Joseph Stalin is the leader of the Soviet Union during this time period. We have our 32nd and our 33rd presidents of the U.S., Roosevelt and Truman. They will both handle World War II. So these are going to be our major leaders, and some of them are going to make some pretty shocking decisions of what to do with their countries. And I think the important thing is to remember is that in a lot of these cases, these men were elected into their positions. They didn't just take power. They were elected by the people because the people felt this is the direction they wanted to go. So our 2 major powers, the Axis powers, this included Germany, Italy, and Japan, and then our Allied powers, which was France, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. And then eventually the U.S. will come into the war. So last unit, in our World War I unit, we had the Central powers here, and we kept the Allied powers. But now, in World War II, we have the Axis powers and the Allied powers. But as you can see, a lot of the countries stayed the same based on their side. And this would make sense because the people who were on the Axis powers, especially Germany, felt that the Treaty of Versailles betrayed them and they didn't like it. And the Allied powers are the ones who created the Treaty of Versailles. This is going to be our map of Europe, our combat map of Europe during World War II. The red is the Axis powers, the yellow is the neutral, and the green are the Allied powers. So this is at the area of maximum Axis expansion, meaning that this is as far as the Axis powers are going to get during World War II. As you can see, they took over a lot of places. Now, 2 major powers that you see, Great Britain is still green and half of Russia is still green. But France was taken over. All of northern Africa down here is taken over. All these little countries in Europe were taken over. So, as you can see, the Axis powers took over a lot of land during World War II. Alright, so why did this happen? We know that after Germany lost World War I, there was a lot of hatred and resentment because of the Treaty of Versailles. Because the Germans had developed a general hate towards the rest of the world, and they elected Adolf Hitler as their president. Because he promised that he was going to get the broken German country back together to be this great place once more. Also, there was a policy of appeasement along the Allied powers, especially in Great Britain. So they were going to let Germany do what they want to make them happy, and hopefully that would be enough to stop them. But Hitler demanded land that wasn't Germany's, but people just gave it to him. Many of the nations were trying to prevent the war, it just didn't work. And instead of making Hitler happy, by giving Hitler what he wanted, it just showed him that he could do whatever he wanted, and nobody was going to stop him. Are different types of governments that we'll see. The first one is totalitarianism. It is a system in which the state and its leaders have nearly total control, so they do not think that individual rights are important. There's no right to vote, there's no free speech, it's completely controlled by the government, and it's often a police state. So, totalitarianism is our major government that we're going to see during this time. As you can see, some other countries kind of fall underneath it. So the USSR, also known as the Soviet Union, was a communist dictatorship. Germany and Italy were fascist dictatorships, and Japan was a military dictatorship. Down at the bottom here, connected to fascist dictatorship, fascism is a political movement that promotes an extreme form of nationalism. Remember, nationalism is a feeling of pride for one's country. So an extreme form of pride for one's country, a denial of individual rights, and a dictatorial one-party rule. So, how did World War I start? Well, first of all, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France told Hitler to stop his fighters and to call off the attack, but Hitler would refuse. So, as a result, Britain and France would declare war on Germany. Germany had the aim of building an empire in Europe. So he wasn't going to stop after just taking over one country. He was going to keep going until he had control over all of Europe. He used Blitzkrieg, or the Lightning War, to overwhelm other armies, which meant that he was going to strike without any warning, and he was going to surround them with troops and tanks.